The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the Pentagon briefing room as Major Sarah Chen stared at the classified documents spread across the mahogany table. 3 days. 72 hours of complete radio silence from Forward Operating Base Kestrel, nestled deep in the mountains of Afghanistan. The base housed 150 American soldiers and crucial intelligence assets that couldn't fall into enemy hands. But what made this situation truly unprecedented wasn't just the siege itself. It was the fact that the military's most experienced B-2 Spirit stealth bomber pilot was sitting in a conference room in Virginia, officially grounded, while her aircraft sat idle in a hangar thousands of miles away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Chen wasn't your typical Air Force major. At 34, she had logged more combat hours in the B-2 Spirit than any other pilot in the program's history. Her call sign, Ghost, wasn't just a reference to the stealth bomber she flew. It was earned for her uncanny ability to appear where the enemy least expected her, strike with surgical precision, and vanish without a trace. She had successfully completed 47 combat missions across 3 different theaters of operation, each one flawlessly executed. Her aircraft, tail number 890127, affectionately known as Silent Thunder, had never failed to return home. But none of that mattered now. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah had been involved in what the military bureaucracy classified as an incident. During a routine training exercise over Nevada, her B-2 had experienced what appeared to be a minor electrical malfunction. The backup systems had engaged flawlessly, the aircraft had landed safely, and post-flight inspection revealed nothing more than a loose connection that took maintenance crews 15 minutes to fix. In the civilian world, this would have been logged as routine maintenance. In the military world of risk assessment and liability concerns, it triggered a mandatory safety review. The Safety Review Board, comprised entirely of desk officers who hadn't seen combat in over a decade, had ruled that Major Chen needed to undergo additional psychological evaluation and recertification before returning to flight status. The reasoning, buried in pages of bureaucratic language, essentially boiled down to concern that the stress of her extensive combat record might be affecting her judgment. It was the kind of decision that looked good on paper to review committees and congressional oversight panels, but made little sense to anyone who understood actual combat operations. So while Sarah sat in briefing rooms and filled out psychological assessment forms, FOB Kestrel had come under attack. The assault had begun at 0347 local time on a Tuesday. Intelligence suggested it was a coordinated effort by a coalition of Taliban forces and foreign fighters, possibly numbering in the hundreds. They had managed to cut all communication lines, disable the base's satellite uplinks, and establish positions that made helicopter extraction impossible. The mountain terrain that had made Kestrel such an excellent intelligence gathering post now made it a perfect trap. The Situation Room at the Pentagon buzzed with frustrated energy. General Harrison, a decorated veteran who had commanded ground forces during the invasion of Iraq, paced behind the conference table like a caged lion. He would mutter to himself more than to the assembled staff. "We've got Predator drones circling the area, but we can't see through the cloud cover. Weather reports showed this storm system isn't moving for another 48 hours. Colonel Martinez, the Air Force representative, shuffled through satellite images that showed little more than gray clouds and mountain peaks. "Sir, we've got F-16s on standby in Qatar, but the terrain around Kestrel makes low-level attack runs extremely dangerous, especially in this weather. We'd be sending pilots in blind, and even if they made it through, conventional ordnance isn't precise enough to help our people without risking significant collateral damage." The reality was stark and unforgiving. FOB Kestrel was located in a narrow valley surrounded by peaks that rose over 12,000 feet above sea level. The approaches were treacherous, even in perfect weather, and the Kurd storm system had reduced visibility to less than quarter of a mile. Traditional close air support aircraft would have to fly dangerously low to be effective, making them sitting ducks for the surface-to-air missiles that intelligence suggested the attackers possessed. But there was one aircraft in the American arsenal that could penetrate enemy airspace undetected, navigate by instruments alone, and deliver precision strikes with surgical accuracy, even in the worst weather conditions. The B-2 Spirit stealth bomber was specifically designed for exactly this type of mission. Its advanced radar systems could map terrain and identify targets through cloud cover, its stealth profile made it virtually invisible to enemy air defenses, and its precision-guided munitions could eliminate threats within meters of friendly forces. The problem was that the Air Force's most experienced B-2 Spirit pilot was sitting in a Pentagon conference room, technically grounded, while her aircraft remained in a hangar at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room, least of all Sarah herself. She had spent the last 3 weeks watching CNN reports about increased insurgent activity in Afghanistan, reading intelligence briefings that painted an increasingly dangerous picture, all while filling out paperwork about her psychological readiness for combat operations. General Harrison finally stopped pacing and turned to face Sarah directly. Major Chen, I want your honest assessment. If we could get you clearance to fly, could you get through to Kestrel? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Everyone in the room knew the answer, but military protocol demanded it be asked.
Sarah looked up from the satellite images, her dark eyes steady and unblinking. The question wasn't really about her capabilities as a pilot. Everyone in that room knew she could fly the B-2 through conditions that would ground every other aircraft in the Air Force inventory. The real question was whether the military bureaucracy would allow her to do what she was trained for, or whether politics and liability concerns would condemn 150 American soldiers to whatever fate awaited them at FOB Kestrel. Sir, with all due respect, you already know the answer to that question, Sarah replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had never failed a mission. Silent Thunder can penetrate that airspace undetected, map the enemy positions through the cloud cover, and deliver precision strikes that will break the siege without endangering our people. The B-2's APQ-181 radar can see through weather that would blind every other aircraft we have. But more importantly, I know that terrain. I've flown over those mountains 17 times in the past 2 years. I could navigate those approaches in my sleep. Colonel Martinez shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Major, your technical proficiency isn't in question here. The issue is your current flight status. The Safety Review Board's recommendations, specifically, the Safety Review Board's recommendations, General Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of command authority, were made under peacetime conditions for routine training operations. This is not a routine training operation, Colonel. We have American soldiers under fire, cut off from all support, facing an enemy force of unknown size and capability. Sometimes, exceptional circumstances require exceptional decisions. The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah understood the delicate position everyone was in. Military careers had been ended for far less than bypassing safety protocols, even in combat situations. But she also understood something that the desk officers and review boards often forgot. The military existed to accomplish missions that civilian agencies couldn't handle, and sometimes that meant accepting calculated risks that would be unthinkable in any other context. Sir, I may offer an observation, Sarah said carefully. The weather data shows this storm system intensifying over the next 24 hours before it begins to dissipate. If we wait for perfect conditions, we're looking at minimum 72 hours before conventional aircraft can effectively operate in that area. By then, FOB Kestrel will either have been overrun or our people will have exhausted their defensive ammunition. She pulled up a detailed topographical map on her tablet, highlighting the approaches to the base. But the B-2 doesn't need perfect conditions. The radar absorbent coating is designed to operate in all weather conditions, and the synthetic aperture radar can provide targeting data that's actually more precise than visual identification. The storm isn't a handicap for Silent Thunder, it's additional cover. General Harrison studied the maps, his weathered face betraying decades of combat experience. He had seen what happened when politics interfered with military operations, and he had also seen what happened when good soldiers died because someone was afraid to make a hard decision. Major Chen, General Harrison said, if I were to hypothetically restore your flight status, how quickly could you be airborne? Sarah had been mentally planning the mission from the moment she heard about the siege. Silent Thunder is maintained at constant readiness status at Whiteman Air Force Base. Flight planning for this type of mission would take approximately 4 hours, including weather analysis, target identification, and munitions loading. I could be wheels up within 6 hours of receiving authorization. The room fell silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Everyone understood the implications. This wasn't just about one mission or one pilot. It was about whether the military would allow bureaucratic risk aversion to override operational necessity. The safety review process had been implemented after several high-profile accidents that had resulted in congressional hearings and media scrutiny. No one wanted to be the officer who circumvented established procedures, even if those procedures were preventing them from saving American lives. But General Harrison hadn't reached his current rank by avoiding difficult decisions. He had commanded troops in urban combat in Fallujah, where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and casualties. He understood that sometimes the greatest risk was failing to act. General Harrison, the commander said, his voice carrying the finality of command decision, I want you to contact the Chief of Staff's office immediately. Inform them that I am invoking emergency operational authority to restore Major Chen to flight status for this specific mission. I'll take full responsibility for any consequences. Sarah felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the same feeling she experienced every time she climbed into Silent Thunder's cockpit. But this was different. This wasn't a training exercise or even a routine combat mission. This was a rescue operation where failure meant watching American soldiers die while she sat in a briefing room filling out paperwork. Sir, Colonel Martinez said carefully, the political ramifications of this decision could be significant. If something goes wrong, Colonel, General Harrison's voice cut through the air like a blade. The political ramifications of losing an entire forward operation base because we were afraid to let our best pilot fly will be considerably more significant. Major Chen, consider yourself restored to active flight status. I want you on the next transport to Whiteman Air Force Base. Sarah stood, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like the familiar harness of her ejection seat. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Major, but understand this. You'll be flying into the worst weather conditions we've seen in that region in over a decade against an enemy force of unknown strength with no backup and no possibility of rescue if something goes wrong. This isn't just another mission. Sarah gathered her materials, her mind already shifting into mission planning mode. Sir, with respect, there's no such thing as just another mission when American lives are on the line. I'll bring our people home.
The transport aircraft's engines roared to life as Sarah strapped herself into the webbed seating, her mind already thousands of miles away in the cockpit of Silent Thunder. The flight to Whiteman Air Force Base would give her precious time to review intelligence reports, weather data, and mission parameters, but it would also give her time to think about what she was truly facing. This wasn't just another precision strike against a known target. This was a rescue mission where the margin for error was measured in American lives. Her satellite phone buzzed with an encrypted message from the Pentagon Intelligence Division. The latest drone reconnaissance, conducted just hours earlier, had managed to penetrate the cloud cover for brief moments, providing snapshots of the situation at FOB Kestrel. The images were grainy and incomplete, but they painted a picture that made Sarah's jaw tighten with determination. The base was completely surrounded. Enemy positions had been established on 3 sides of the valley with what appeared to be heavy weapons emplacements covering all possible approach routes. Most concerning were the heat signatures that suggested the attackers possessed man-portable air defense systems, shoulder-fired missiles that could bring down helicopters and low-flying aircraft. The defenders at Kestrel had been forced back to a defensive perimeter roughly half the size of the original base, indicating they were running low on ammunition and supplies. But what struck Sarah most was something that wouldn't be obvious to most people reviewing the intelligence photos. The enemy positions weren't random. They showed sophisticated military planning and coordination. These weren't opportunistic insurgents taking advantage of isolated American forces. This was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to capture or destroy an important intelligence asset, and the people behind it understood exactly what they were doing. Sarah's phone rang with a secure call from Lieutenant Colonel James Hawk Morrison, her former squadron commander and current operations officer at Whiteman. His gravelly voice carried the weight of shared combat experience. "Ghost, Please tell me you're not as crazy as the mission brief makes this sound. Hawk, you know me better than that. I'm probably crazier. Sarah's dry humor had been a constant throughout their years flying together, but her tone carried an underlying seriousness that Morrison recognized immediately. Sarah, I've been looking at the weather data and the terrain maps. This isn't just dangerous, it's borderline impossible. You're talking about flying through mountain passes in zero visibility with surface winds gusting up to 60 knots against an enemy force that's had 3 days to prepare for exactly this kind of response. Sarah appreciated Morrison's concern, but she had already run the calculations in her head dozens of times during the flight. Hawk, what's impossible is asking 150 American soldiers to hold out indefinitely against superior numbers while we worry about weather reports. Silent Thunder was built for exactly this kind of mission. The question isn't whether it's dangerous. The question is whether we're going to let our people die because we're afraid to take calculated risks. Morrison's silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. He had flown combat missions with Sarah for 3 years, and he had never seen her take unnecessary risks or let ego override good judgment. If she said the mission was possible, then it was possible. But that didn't make it any less terrifying. All right, Ghost. Your bird is being prepped as we speak. Maintenance crews have been working around the clock to ensure every system is at peak performance. What's your weapons loadout preference? Sarah had been thinking about this since leaving the Pentagon. Traditional close air support relied on area effect weapons that could suppress enemy positions, but risked collateral damage to friendly forces. But the B-2's precision-guided munitions offered capabilities that no other aircraft could match. I want a mixed loadout, she said, her voice taking on the clinical precision of mission planning. Primary load will be GBU-39 small-diameter bombs for precision strikes against identified enemy positions, secondary load of GBU-31 JDAMs for hardened targets if they've established bunkers or cave positions, and I want 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, just in case they've got underground facilities we haven't identified. Morrison whistled low. The massive ordnance penetrator was the largest conventional bomb in the American arsenal, designed to destroy deeply buried bunkers and underground facilities. It wasn't typically used in close support operations because of its tremendous destructive power, but Sarah was clearly planning for contingencies that went beyond the standard rescue mission profile. Sarah, MOPs aren't exactly precision instruments. If you're planning to drop 30,000-pound bunker busters anywhere near friendly forces, I'm planning to end the siege decisively and permanently. The intelligence reports suggest this is more than just a random attack on an isolated base. Someone invested significant time and resources into this operation, which means they believe FOB Kestrel contains something worth that investment. If we just break the immediate siege without eliminating the threat entirely, our people will be back under attack within hours. The transport aircraft hit turbulence, reminding Sarah of the weather conditions she would soon be flying through in an aircraft worth over $2 billion. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the weight of responsibility she carried. Every decision she made over the next few hours would directly impact whether 150 American soldiers lived or died. Ghost, Morrison's voice carried a note of finality. Your aircraft will be ready when you arrive. Weather briefing is scheduled for 1400 hours, final mission briefing at 1600 hours, and you're cleared for takeoff at 1800 hours if conditions permit. Conditions will permit, Hawk. They have to. As the transport began its descent toward Whiteman Air Force Base, Sarah could see Silent Thunder through one of the small windows, sitting in its specialized hangar like a sleeping predator waiting to be awakened.
The specialized hangar at Whiteman Air Force Base hummed with activity as Sarah walked across the polished concrete floor towards Silent Thunder. Even after hundreds of hours in the cockpit, the B-2 Spirit never failed to inspire awe. Its triangular wingspan stretched 172 feet across the hangar, while its radar-absorbent coating gave it an almost otherworldly appearance under the fluorescent lights. This wasn't just an aircraft. It was a manifestation of decades of cutting-edge engineering designed to penetrate the most heavily defended airspace on Earth and deliver precision strikes where no other aircraft could survive. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the head of Silent Thunder's maintenance crew, approached with a tablet containing the pre-flight inspection report. Major Chen, she's as ready as we can make her. We've run complete diagnostics on all flight systems, weapons systems, and defensive countermeasures. The radar absorbent coating has been inspected and touched up where necessary, and we've loaded your requested ordnance configuration. Sarah reviewed the maintenance logs, noting the meticulous attention to detail that characterized every aspect of B-2 operations. Each aircraft cost more than some nations' entire defense budgets, and the maintenance requirements reflected that extraordinary value. But more importantly, the lives of 150 American soldiers would depend on every system functioning flawlessly under the most demanding conditions imaginable. "Chief, what's the status on the synthetic aperture radar?" Sarah asked, knowing that the B-2's advanced radar system would be crucial for navigating and targeting in zero visibility conditions. "Fully operational, ma'am. We've calibrated the system specifically for the terrain you'll be operating in, and we've loaded the latest topographical data for the target area. The system will be able to provide real-time ground mapping even through the heaviest cloud cover." The weather briefing had been sobering, but not surprising. The storm system over Afghanistan was massive, stretching across hundreds of miles and generating winds that would make conventional flight operations impossible. But the B-2 had been designed to operate in conditions that would ground every other aircraft in the Air Force inventory. Its advanced fly-by-wire flight control system could compensate for atmospheric disturbances that would tear apart lesser aircraft. Sarah began her pre-flight inspection, running her hands along the aircraft's smooth surfaces, checking for any imperfections in the radar-absorbent coating. This ritual wasn't just about mechanical safety, it was about establishing the mental connection between pilot and aircraft that would be essential during the hours of high-stress combat flying ahead. Her secure phone buzzed with an update from the Pentagon Situation Room. The latest intelligence indicated that the siege at FOB Kestrel was intensifying. Intercepted communications suggested the attackers were preparing for a final assault within the next 12 hours. The base's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, had managed to get a brief message through using a backup emergency radio system, but the transmission had been fragmentary and cut short by enemy jamming. What she had managed to communicate was chilling. Ammunition running low, medical supplies exhausted, enemy preparing assault positions. Request immediate support. The message was followed by coordinates that had been transmitted in the clear, indicating that Hayes was desperate enough to risk compromising her position for the chance of receiving help. It was the kind of decision that commanders only made when they believed they were running out of time and options. Sarah climbed the ladder into Silent Thunder's cockpit, settling into the ejection seat that had been molded specifically for her body dimensions. The B-2's cockpit was a marvel of advanced technology, with multifunction displays that could present radar data, navigation information, weapon status, and threat warnings. But despite all the high-tech systems, the fundamental relationship between pilot and aircraft remained unchanged. Success would depend on skill, judgment, and the ability to make split-second decisions under pressure. As she began the startup sequence, Sarah's mind drifted back to her first combat mission 3 years ago. She had been nervous then, uncertain whether her training would be sufficient for the reality of combat operations. But over the course of 47 successful missions, she had learned that the key to survival wasn't the absence of fear, it was the ability to function effectively despite fear, to maintain focus and precision when everything around you was chaos and uncertainty. The engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, and Sarah felt the subtle vibration that indicated Silent Thunder was coming to life. The aircraft systems ran through their automated checks, confirming that every component was functioning within acceptable parameters. But Sarah ran her own checks as well, testing control responses, verifying weapon systems, and confirming that the defensive countermeasures were operational. Whiteman Tower, this is Ghost requesting clearance for takeoff. Ghost, you are cleared for takeoff. Weather conditions at departure are marginal but acceptable. Be advised that conditions in your target area remain severe. Roger Tower, Ghost is rolling. Sarah advanced the throttles, feeling 34,000
1,000 pounds of thrust pushed the massive aircraft down the runway. Despite its size, the B-2 lifted off smoothly, its advanced aerodynamics allowing it to become airborne at relatively low speeds. As the landing gear retracted with mechanical precision, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of leaving the constraints of earthbound operations behind. But this takeoff was different from the dozens that had preceded it. This time, she wasn't heading to a predetermined target against known enemy positions. She was flying into a dynamic situation where intelligence was incomplete. Weather conditions were dangerous, and the margin for error was measured in American lives. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders as Missouri disappeared beneath the clouds. The flight to Afghanistan would take over 14 hours, including 2 aerial refueling operations. It would give her time to study the intelligence data, plan her approach routes, and mentally prepare for what promised to be the most challenging mission of her career. But it would also give her time to think about the 150 soldiers who were counting on her to succeed where conventional forces had failed.
Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 8 hours into the flight, cruising at 50,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, Sarah received an encrypted communication that changed everything. The message came directly from General Harrison's office, marked with the highest priority classification, and its contents made her blood run cold. Intelligence analysts had been working around the clock to identify the force attacking FOB Kestrel, and what they had discovered went far beyond a simple insurgent assault. Satellite imagery and electronic intelligence suggested the presence of foreign military advisors, sophisticated communications equipment, and weapon systems that were far more advanced than anything typically seen in Taliban operations. Most concerning was the detection of electronic signatures consistent with advanced surface-to-air missile systems, not the shoulder-fired weapons they had initially suspected, but vehicle-mounted systems capable of engaging high-altitude targets. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just an attack on an isolated American outpost, it was a carefully planned operation designed to test American response capabilities and possibly capture advanced intelligence assets. The presence of foreign advisors suggested state sponsorship, which meant the political ramifications of the mission had just expanded exponentially. But what made Sarah's hands tighten on the flight controls was the final paragraph of the intelligence update. Reconnaissance satellites had detected what appeared to be a mobile command post approximately 5 miles from FOB Kestrel, positioned in a location that suggested the attackers were not just trying to overrun the base. They were trying to capture it intact. The implications were obvious. FOB Kestrel contained something valuable enough to justify this level of risk and resource investment. Sarah's secure communication system crackled with an incoming transmission from Lieutenant Colonel Morrison. "Ghost, please tell me you're seeing the same intelligence reports I'm looking at." "I see them, Hawk. This changes the tactical picture significantly." "Sarah, if there are advanced SAM systems in that area, Silent Thunder's stealth advantage might not be as decisive as we thought. These aren't old Soviet-era systems we're talking about. Some of these newer platforms have capabilities specifically designed to detect low observable aircraft." Sarah understood Morrison's concern, but she had been thinking about this possibility since the original mission briefing. The B-2's stealth technology was remarkable, but it wasn't magic. Under certain conditions, with the right equipment and sufficient warning, it was possible to detect even the most advanced stealth aircraft. But what most people didn't understand was that detection and engagement were 2 entirely different challenges. "Hawk, even if they can detect Silent Thunder, they still have to lock onto her long enough to get a filing solution. And more importantly, they have to survive long enough to engage. The B-2's electronic warfare suite isn't just defensive, it's designed to disrupt enemy air defense systems before they can effectively respond. The electronic warfare capabilities of the B-2 were among its most closely guarded secrets. The aircraft carried sophisticated jamming equipment that could blind enemy radar systems, disrupt communications networks, and create false targets that would overwhelm defensive systems. In the right hands, these capabilities could turn advanced air defenses into expensive scrap metal. As Silent Thunder crossed into European airspace for the first aerial refueling operation, Sarah began receiving real-time updates from FOB Kestrel. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The base's outer defensive perimeter had been breached in 2 locations, forcing the defenders to fall back to secondary positions around the main buildings. Medical casualties were mounting and ammunition supplies were critical. Most disturbing was the report that enemy forces had begun using loudspeakers to broadcast surrender demands in perfect American English, suggesting the presence of personnel with advanced knowledge of American military procedures and psychology. The psychological warfare component indicated a level of sophistication that went far beyond typical insurgent operations. The aerial refueling operation over the Mediterranean Sea was routine but tense. The KC-135 Stratotanker crew was professional and efficient, but Sarah could sense their awareness that this wasn't a standard training exercise. The fuel transfer took place in complete radio silence, with communication limited to standard hand signals between aircraft. Even at 30,000 feet over international waters, operational security was paramount. As Silent Thunder separated from the tanker and continued eastward, Sarah began her final mission preparations. The weapons systems came online with quiet electronic acknowledgments, and the targeting computers began processing the latest intelligence data from the target area. Each weapon had been selected for a specific purpose: the small-diameter bombs for precision strikes against personnel positions, the JDAMs for hardened targets, and the massive bunker busters as insurance against underground facilities. But Sarah's most important weapon wasn't carried in the aircraft's bomb bay. It was her experience and judgment. Over the course of 47 combat missions, she had learned to read the invisible patterns of aerial warfare, to anticipate enemy responses, and to adapt her tactics in real time as situations developed. These skills couldn't be programmed into computers or taught in classroom settings. They were earned through experience and refined through survival. The second aerial refueling operation took place over the Arabian Sea, just hours before sunrise. This time, the KC-135 crew seemed more tense, possibly because they understood that they were fueling an aircraft heading into what might be the most dangerous single-pilot mission of the entire war. The fuel transfer was completed without incident, but Sarah noticed that the tanker crew maintained visual contact with Silent Thunder for longer than usual, as if they wanted to wish her luck but couldn't break radio silence to do so. As the first hints of dawn began to appear on the eastern horizon, Sarah received her final intelligence update before entering the target area. The storm system had intensified exactly as predicted, with cloud cover extending from ground level to over 40,000 feet. Visibility was essentially zero, and winds were gusting to 70 knots, and the temperature differential between different atmospheric layers was creating severe turbulence that had forced all other aircraft to avoid the area entirely. For conventional aircraft, these conditions would be prohibitive. For Silent Thunder, they provided perfect cover for an undetected approach to the target area.
The Hindu Kush Mountains appeared on Silent Thunder's radar display like the jagged teeth of some primordial beast, their peaks stretching up to meet the storm clouds that had turned the entire region into an impenetrable gray void. Sarah descended to 35,000 feet, well above the highest mountain peaks, but low enough to begin detailed reconnaissance of the target area. The aircraft's synthetic aperture radar painted a detailed picture of the terrain below, revealing the narrow valley that housed FOB Kestrel and the enemy positions that surrounded it. What Sarah saw on her displays confirmed her worst fears about the sophistication of the attack. The enemy positions weren't randomly placed. They formed a carefully coordinated defensive network that covered all possible approach routes to the base. More concerning were the radar signatures that indicated the presence of multiple air defense systems, positioned to provide overlapping coverage of the airspace above the valley. "This isn't an insurgent operation," Sarah muttered to herself as she studied the tactical display. "This is a professional military assault using textbook siege tactics." The synthetic aperture radar revealed details that had been invisible to previous reconnaissance efforts. The mobile command post was larger than initially estimated, with multiple antenna arrays and what appeared to be hardened communication bunkers. The enemy had clearly invested significant time and resources into this operation, suggesting that whatever intelligence assets were housed at FOB Kestrel were worth considerable risk.
But what made Sarah's blood run cold was the discovery of what appeared to be preparation areas for a final assault. Heavy weapons had been moved into position during the night, and thermal imaging revealed concentrations of personnel that suggested the attackers were preparing for a coordinated attack from multiple directions. The defenders at FOB Kestrel had perhaps hours before they would be overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. Sarah began her approach to the target area, descending through the storm clouds with the confidence of someone who had navigated similar conditions dozens of times before. Silent Thunder's flight control systems automatically compensated for the severe turbulence, while the radar altimeter provided precise altitude information despite the complete absence of visual references. At 25,000 feet, the aircraft broke through the lower cloud layer for a brief moment, giving Sarah her first visual glimpse of the battlefield below. Even through the swirling snow and limited visibility, she could see the muzzle flashes and tracer fire that indicated active combat was taking place around the base's perimeter. The defenders were still fighting, but their position was clearly desperate. FOB Kestrel, this is Ghost. I am inbound to your location with close air support. Can you mark your current positions? The response came through layers of static and electronic interference, but Sarah could make out the voice of Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, the base commander. Ghost, thank God you're here. We're down to less than 2 hours of ammunition, and they're massing for what looks like a final assault from the north and west. Roger, Kestrel. I need you to mark your perimeter with infrared strobes if you have them. I'm going to be engaging targets within danger close range of your positions. There was a pause before Hayes responded, and when she did, her voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what danger close meant in the context of precision bombing. Ghost, we're marking our positions now. Be advised we have wounded personnel in the main building who cannot be moved. Sarah acknowledged the transmission as she lined up for her first attack run. The tactical situation required a careful balance between eliminating enemy threats and avoiding collateral damage to friendly forces. The margin for error was measured in meters, and a single mistake could result in American casualties from her own weapons. The first target was an enemy mortar position that had been providing indirect fire support for the assault on the base's northern perimeter. Sarah selected a GBU-39 small-diameter bomb, a precision weapon designed for exactly this type of mission. The weapon's advanced guidance system would allow her to place the explosive within a few feet of the target, eliminating the threat without endangering nearby friendly forces. Kestrel, this is Ghost. Engaging mortar position north of your perimeter. Take cover. Silent Thunder's bomb bay doors opened silently, and the small-diameter bomb dropped into the storm clouds below. Sarah watched on her targeting display as the weapon's GPS guidance system guided it through the weather to its target. The explosion appeared on her thermal imaging system as a brief white flash, followed by the disappearance of the heat signature that had marked the enemy position. Ghost, this is Kestrel. Direct hit on the mortar position. Outstanding shooting. But Sarah knew that eliminating one mortar position wouldn't be sufficient to break the siege. The enemy had multiple defensive positions, and they would adapt their tactics now that they knew American air support was in the area. She needed to strike multiple targets in rapid succession, disrupting their coordination and forcing them to abandon their assault preparations. The second target was a heavy machine gun position that had been suppressing the base's eastern defensive line. This required a more delicate approach, as the enemy position was less than 50 meters from American defensive positions. Sarah selected another small-diameter bomb, but this one would require manual guidance corrections to ensure precision placement. As she lined up for the attack run, Silent Thunder's defensive systems detected multiple radar emissions from the ground. The enemy air defense systems were actively scanning for her aircraft, but the B-2 stealth profile was making it difficult for them to achieve a solid lock. Electronic jamming signals indicated they were trying to disrupt her navigation and targeting systems, but Silent Thunder's electronic warfare suite was successfully countering their efforts. Kestrel, second target engaged, machine gun position on your eastern perimeter. The second small-diameter bomb found its mark with surgical precision, the explosion silencing the heavy machine gun that had been pinning down the base's eastern defensive line. I could hear the relief in Lieutenant Colonel Hayes' voice as she reported the successful strike, but both women understood that this was only the beginning of what would be a long and dangerous night. Sarah's threat warning system suddenly erupted with multiple alerts as enemy air defense systems throughout the valley came online simultaneously. What had been a manageable tactical situation was rapidly evolving into something far more dangerous. The enemy had been waiting for her to reveal her presence through her attacks, and now they were implementing a coordinated response that would test every aspect of Silent Thunder's advanced capabilities. Multiple SAM sites active, Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the severity of the threat. This isn't no longer a rescue mission. This is a full-scale aerial engagement. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't just facing a siege, she had flown directly into a carefully prepared trap designed to capture or destroy the most advanced stealth bomber in the American arsenal. The next few minutes would determine not just the fate of FOB Kestrel, but possibly the future of American stealth aviation technology.
The second explosion illuminated the valley for a brief moment, revealing the true scope of the enemy positions through Sarah's night vision systems. What she saw made her realize that this siege was even more sophisticated than intelligence had suggested. The attackers had constructed elaborate defensive positions using the natural terrain, creating interlocking fields of fire that would make any ground assault extremely costly. But more concerning was the evidence of engineering work, trenches, bunkers, and defensive positions that would have taken weeks to construct properly. How long have they been planning this operation? Sarah wondered aloud as she banked Silent Thunder for another attack run. The level of preparation suggested this wasn't an opportunistic attack on an isolated base. It was a carefully orchestrated operation that had been months in the making. Her targeting systems identified the next priority target, a vehicle-mounted surface-to-air missile system that posed the greatest threat to any potential helicopter rescue operations. The SAM system was positioned on a ridgeline approximately 2 miles from the base, giving it excellent coverage of the entire valley. Eliminating it would be crucial for any follow-up operations, but it also represented the greatest risk to Silent Thunder. As Sarah approached the target, her electronic warfare systems detected active radar emissions from the SAM site. The enemy operators were actively searching for her aircraft, and their radar signature indicated a system far more sophisticated than anything typically seen in insurgent operations. This was military-grade equipment, operated by personnel who understood its capabilities and limitations. "Ghost, be advised," came Lieutenant Colonel Hayes' voice over the radio. "We're seeing increased activity from enemy positions. They appear to be repositioning forces in response to your strikes." Sarah acknowledged the transmission while simultaneously analyzing the tactical situation. The enemy was adapting to her presence, which meant she had a limited window of opportunity before they could implement effective countermeasures. She needed to strike decisively while maintaining the element of surprise. The approach to the SAM site required flying through a narrow mountain pass while maintaining enough altitude to avoid ground fire from small arms. Sarah descended to 20,000 feet, using the terrain to mask her approach from the missile system's radar. Silent Thunder's stealth profile would make detection difficult, but not impossible at close range. As she lined up for the attack run, Sarah's threat warning systems suddenly came alive with multiple radar contacts. The enemy had activated additional air defense systems that had remained hidden during her previous passes. She was now flying through what military tacticians called a threat envelope, airspace covered by multiple overlapping defensive systems, any of which could potentially engage her aircraft. "Multiple SAM sites active," Sarah reported to FOB Kestrel. "This is a much larger operation than we initially assessed." The tactical situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. Instead of facing a single air defense system, Sarah was now dealing with a coordinated network of multiple sites, operated by personnel who clearly understood integrated air defense tactics. This level of sophistication suggested direct involvement by foreign military advisors with advanced training. Sarah selected a GBU-31 JDAM,
for the primary SAM site, a larger weapon with enhanced penetration capabilities. The 2,000-pound bomb would ensure complete destruction of the target, but it would also announce her presence to every enemy position in the area. Stealth would no longer be an option after this attack. She would have to rely on speed, maneuverability, and electronic countermeasures to survive. Kestrel, this is Ghost. I'm engaging the primary SAM site. Be prepared for increased enemy activity after this strike. The JDAM dropped from Silent Thunder's bomb bay and began its guided descent through the storm clouds. Sarah immediately initiated evasive maneuvers, banking hard to the left while deploying electronic countermeasures to confuse any missiles that might be launched in her direction. Her defensive systems detected multiple radar locks attempting to track her movements, but the B-2's electronic warfare suite was successfully disrupting their targeting solutions. The explosion from the JDAM was massive, lighting up the entire valley and creating a mushroom cloud that rose above the mountain peaks. The thermal signature was visible on Sarah's displays for over 30 seconds after the initial detonation. Ghost, this is Kestrel. Outstanding hit on the SAM site. The explosion was visible from our position even through the storm. But Sarah's celebration was short-lived. Her threat warning systems detected multiple missile launches from positions she hadn't previously identified. The enemy had revealed their hidden air defense systems, and they were now actively engaging her aircraft. Sarah's stealth profile had been compromised by the proximity of the attacks, and she was now fighting for survival in heavily defended airspace. Multiple missiles inbound, Sarah announced over the radio. As she initiated emergency evasive maneuvers, Silent Thunder banked nearly vertical as Sarah pulled the aircraft through a series of high G-turns designed to break the missile guidance system's tracking solutions. The advanced fly-by-wire flight controls allowed the B-2 to perform maneuvers that would have been impossible in conventional aircraft. But Sarah could feel the stress that the extreme maneuvering was placing on both the aircraft and her own body. The first missile passed harmlessly behind Silent Thunder, its guidance system unable to maintain lock on the rapidly maneuvering stealth aircraft. But the second missile was tracking more accurately, and Sarah realized she would need to use active countermeasures to survive. She activated the aircraft's defensive jamming systems while simultaneously releasing chaff and flares to confuse the missile's guidance systems. The missile detonated approximately 500 meters from Silent Thunder, close enough that Sarah felt the shockwave, but far enough away to avoid serious damage to the aircraft. Emergency warning lights illuminated her cockpit as the aircraft's systems assessed the effects of the near miss, but initial indications suggested no critical damage had occurred. "Ghost, what's your status?" came Hayes' concerned voice over the radio. "Still in the fight, Kestrel, but we've got a much bigger problem than we initially thought. This isn't just a siege, it's a trap."
As Sarah fought to regain control of the tactical situation, the true scope of the enemy operation became clear. The attack on FOB Kestrel wasn't just about capturing an isolated American outpost. It was designed to draw American air assets into a predetermined kill zone where they could be engaged by a sophisticated, integrated air defense network. She had flown directly into what military planners called a layered defense, multiple defensive systems positioned to provide overlapping coverage with no gaps for escape. But the enemy had made one critical miscalculation. They had planned their trap around conventional aircraft with predictable flight profiles and limited maneuverability. Silent Thunder's unique capabilities allowed Sarah to operate in ways that their defensive systems hadn't been designed to counter. The question was whether she could exploit those advantages before their numerical superiority overwhelmed her aircraft's defensive systems. Sarah's tactical display showed at least 6 different radar emissions from previously undetected positions. The enemy had revealed their full defensive network in response to her attacks, which meant she now had complete intelligence on their positions, but also faced the maximum possible threat level. Every moment she remained in the area increased the probability that one of those systems would achieve a successful engagement. "Kestrel, I need immediate intelligence on the enemy command post. If I can eliminate their coordination capabilities, their integrated defense network will become vulnerable." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes' response was immediate. "Ghost, the command post is located approximately 5 miles northwest of our position. Grid coordinates November Delta 742915. Be advised, that location is heavily defended and appears to have underground facilities." Sarah acknowledged the transmission while simultaneously planning her approach to the target.
The command post represented the highest value target in the area, but it would also be the most heavily defended. Eliminating it would require using her most powerful weapons, and the approach would take her through the heart of the enemy's defensive network. As she maneuvered Silent Thunder toward the new target, Sarah's electronic warfare systems detected something that made her blood run cold. The enemy communications networks were using encryption algorithms and frequency hopping patterns that were far too sophisticated for insurging forces. This was military-grade communication equipment operated by personnel with advanced training in electronic warfare and signals intelligence. "This operation has state sponsorship," Sarah muttered as she analyzed the electronic signatures. The implications were staggering. If a foreign government was directly supporting this operation, then the political ramifications of the mission had just expanded far beyond a simple rescue operation. But Sarah's immediate concern wasn't politics. It was the 150 American soldiers who were depending on her to break the siege before they were overwhelmed. The latest reports from FOB Kestrel indicated that enemy forces were massing for what appeared to be a final coordinated assault from multiple directions. The defenders had perhaps 30 minutes before they would be facing overwhelming odds. Sarah selected one of her 2 remaining GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators for the attack on the command post. The 30,000-pound bunker buster was designed to destroy the most heavily fortified underground facilities, and its massive explosive payload would ensure complete destruction of the target. But using such a large weapon would also create a massive radar signature that would make her aircraft visible to every defensive system in the area. "Kestrel, this is Ghost. I'm engaging the command post with heavy ordnance. This is going to attract significant activity in your area, so be prepared for increased enemy activity in your area." The approach to the command post required flying directly through the valley where most of the enemy air defense systems were positioned. Sarah descended to 15,000 feet, using the mountainous terrain to mask her approach while maintaining enough altitude to avoid ground fire from small arms. Silent Thunder's radar altimeter provided precise altitude information as she navigated through the narrow passes in zero visibility conditions. As she approached the target area, Sarah's electronic warfare systems detected multiple radar locks from different directions. The enemy defensive network was tracking her movements and coordinating their engagement attempts. She could see on her tactical display that they were attempting to time their missile launches to create overlapping engagement zones where escape would be impossible. "Target locked," Sarah announced as Silent Thunder's targeting computers confirmed the solution. "Weapon away." The GBU-57 dropped from the aircraft's bomb bay like a falling meteor, its massive weight causing Silent Thunder to surge upward as the 30,000 pounds of ordnance separated from the aircraft. Sarah immediately initiated maximum performance evasive maneuvers, pulling the B-2 through a series of high G turns while climbing rapidly to gain altitude and distance from the impact point. The explosion was unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. The massive bunker buster detonated deep underground, creating a mushroom cloud that rose over 10,000 feet into the air. The blast wave was powerful enough to trigger seismic sensors hundreds of miles away, and the thermal signature was visible on satellite imagery from space. The enemy command post had been completely obliterated, along with a significant portion of the canyon that had housed it. But the use of such a massive weapon had also revealed Silent Thunder's position to every defensive system in the area. Sarah's threat warning systems immediately detected multiple missile launches from positions throughout the valley. The enemy was throwing everything they had at her aircraft, understanding that this might be their only opportunity to achieve a successful engagement. "Multiple missiles inbound from all directions," Sarah reported, as she fought to evade the incoming threats. "I count at least 8 separate launches." Silent Thunder twisted through the mountain air like a massive metal bird of prey, Sarah's hand steady on the controls despite the cacophony of warning alarms filling the cockpit. 8 surface-to-air missiles were converging on her position from multiple directions, each one guided by sophisticated targeting systems that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The enemy had sacrificed their command post to reveal her location, and now they were attempting to achieve what would be the most significant air defense victory in decades, the downing of an American B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. But Sarah had survived 47 previous combat missions by never allowing her opponents to dictate the terms of engagement. As the missiles closed to within 5 miles of her aircraft, she activated Silent Thunder's most advanced defensive systems, capabilities so classified that their existence was known only to a handful of personnel with the highest security clearances. The B-2's electronic warfare suite wasn't just designed to jam enemy radar systems. It could actually take control of certain types of guided missiles, turning the enemy's own weapons against their defensive positions. Sarah's fingers flew across the control interfaces as she attempted to capture the guidance signals of the incoming missiles while simultaneously maneuvering to avoid those that couldn't be electronically compromised. "Come on, baby," Sarah whispered to her aircraft as the first missile passed within 200 meters of Silent Thunder's port wing. The proximity was close enough that she could feel the shockwave through the aircraft's structure, but the missile's guidance system had been successfully confused by the B-2's electronic countermeasures. The second and third missiles were tracking more accurately, forcing Sarah to pull Silent Thunder through a series of maneuvers that pushed both aircraft and pilot to their absolute limits. The B-2 wasn't designed for air-to-air combat maneuvering, but Sarah's years of experience allowed her to exploit every aspect of the aircraft's performance envelope to maintain survival. 2 more missiles detonated harmlessly as their guidance systems were overwhelmed by Silent Thunder's defensive jamming, but the remaining 3 were still tracking and closing fast. Sarah realized she would need to do something that no B-2 pilot had ever attempted in combat: use the aircraft's terrain-following radar to navigate through the mountain peaks at extremely low altitude, using the terrain itself as a defensive screen. "Kestrel, this is Ghost. I'm going to ground level to evade missile engagement. Continue to mark your positions. I'll be back." Sarah pushed Silent Thunder into a near-vertical dive, descending through the storm clouds toward the jagged mountain peaks below. The aircraft's terrain-following radar painted a detailed picture of the approaching landscape, showing peaks, valleys, and obstacles with precise accuracy despite the zero-visibility conditions. At 500 feet above ground level, traveling at over 600 miles per hour, Sarah began threading the massive bomber through mountain passes that were barely wider than the aircraft's wingspan. The maneuver was beyond dangerous. It was nearly suicidal. Flying a 170-foot wingspan aircraft through narrow mountain passes in zero-visibility conditions while being pursued by guided missiles was the kind of stunt that existed only in the fantasies of fiction writers. But Sarah's desperate gamble paid off when 2 of the remaining missiles impacted mountain peaks while attempting to follow her flight path. The final missile was more persistent, its guidance system maintaining lock despite the extreme maneuvering and terrain masking. Sarah could see on her threat display that it was closing rapidly, and she realized she had perhaps 10 seconds before impact. In that moment, she made a decision that would either save her life or end it. She aimed Silent Thunder directly at a narrow canyon that appeared barely wide enough for the aircraft to pass through. At the last possible moment, Sarah pulled back on the controls, causing Silent Thunder to climb sharply, while the missile, unable to match the maneuver, impacted the canyon wall in a massive explosion that sent rock and debris cascading down the mountainside. "Kestrel, this is Ghost. What's your status?" Lieutenant Colonel Hayes' voice crackled over the radio, barely concealing her concern. "Still airborne, Kestrel, but I need a few minutes to assess damage and plan the next phase of the operation." Sarah climbed Silent Thunder back to a safer altitude while running diagnostics on all aircraft systems. The extreme maneuvering had stressed the airframe beyond normal operating parameters, and several warning lights indicated systems that required immediate attention. Most concerning was a hydraulic leak in the primary flight control system. Not immediately dangerous, but something that would limit her maneuvering capabilities for the remainder of the mission. But as Sarah reviewed the tactical situation, she realized that her desperate evasion maneuver had accomplished something unexpected. By forcing the enemy to reveal and expend most of their surface-to-air missiles, she had effectively neutralized their integrated air defense network. The remaining defensive positions were limited to small arms and light anti-aircraft weapons, threats that posed minimal danger to a high-altitude bomber.
More importantly, the destruction of the command post had disrupted the enemy's coordination capabilities. Sarah's electronic intelligence systems detected communications networks attempting to re-establish contact with outlying positions, but the sophisticated encryption and frequency coordination that had characterized their earlier operations was gone. The enemy forces were now operating as isolated units without central coordination. Kestrel, this is Ghost. The enemy air defense network has been neutralized, and their command structure has been disrupted. I'm resuming attacks on remaining enemy positions. Roger that, Ghost. Be advised that we're seeing significant movement in enemy positions. It appears they're beginning to withdraw from some of their forward positions. Sarah smiled grimly as she lined up for another attack run. The enemy had invested months of planning and significant resources into this operation, but they hadn't anticipated facing a pilot with the experience and determination to operate in conditions that would defeat conventional forces. Now their carefully laid trap was collapsing around them as their defensive network crumbled under precision strikes. The next target was a group of heavy weapons positions that had been providing fire support for the assault on FOB Kestrel's northern perimeter. With the air defense threat neutralized, Sarah could approach from optimal angles and engage multiple targets in rapid succession.
The systematic destruction of enemy positions proceeded with mechanical precision as Sarah worked her way through the target list, each strike carefully calculated to maximum effect while minimizing risk to friendly forces. With the integrated air defense network neutralized and the command structure disrupted, the enemy forces were reduced to isolated defensive positions that could be engaged individually without fear of coordinated response. Sarah's fourth strike eliminated a mortar battery that had been harassing the base's medical facility, while her fifth destroyed a heavy machine gun position that had prevented any movement between the base's defensive positions. Each explosion was followed by reports from FOB Kestrel of reduced enemy fire and improved defensive capabilities. The tide of the 72-hour siege was finally turning. But as Sarah prepared for her sixth attack run, her electronic intelligence systems detected something that changed the entire tactical picture. Long-range communication signals were emanating from a previously unidentified location approximately 10 miles from the battle area. The signal characteristics indicated high-power satellite communications equipment, the kind used for strategic-level coordination and intelligence reporting. Kestrel, this is Ghost. I'm detecting long-range communications from a secondary site. This suggests the presence of additional enemy forces or facilities that weren't identified in initial intelligence assessments. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes' response carried a note of concern that hadn't been present in her earlier transmissions. Ghost, we've been monitoring those signals as well. Our intelligence section believes it may be a data collection facility designed to monitor and record American response capabilities. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If the enemy had established a facility specifically designed to collect intelligence on American military capabilities, then this entire operation might have been designed not just to capture FOB Kestrel, but to study how American forces responded to complex siege situations. Every tactic she had used, every capability she had demonstrated might have been recorded and analyzed for future use against American forces. Kestrel, I need precise coordinates for that communication site. If they're collecting intelligence on our response capabilities, that facility becomes the highest priority target. The coordinates came back quickly, indicating a location in a valley system approximately 15 miles northwest of FOB Kestrel. The site was beyond the range of conventional ground-based surveillance from the base, which explained why it hadn't been identified during initial reconnaissance efforts. But its distance from the primary battle area also meant that it was likely defended by fresh forces that hadn't been depleted by the fighting around the base. Sarah checked her remaining ordnance: 2 small-diameter bombs and 1 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator. Sufficient to eliminate the intelligence facility, but she would need to be extremely careful about target identification to ensure she was attacking the correct location. A mistake at this stage could result in striking friendly forces or neutral facilities. The flight to the secondary target took silent thunder over terrain that hadn't been mapped in detail during her earlier reconnaissance. Sarah's synthetic aperture radar revealed a complex of buildings and antenna arrays nestled in a narrow valley surrounded by defensive positions that appeared to be manned by fresh personnel. The facility was larger than she had expected, suggesting it wasn't just a temporary intelligence collection site, but a permanent installation that had been constructed specifically for this operation. Kestrel, I have eyes on the intelligence facility, confirming coordinates and preparing for engagement. As Sarah studied the target complex, she realized that this facility represented something far more significant than a simple intelligence collection site. The antenna arrays were sophisticated enough to support strategic-level communications, and the building complex was large enough to house substantial personnel and equipment. This wasn't just about collecting intelligence on American response capabilities, it was a forward operating base for conducting sophisticated psychological and electronic warfare operations. The presence of such a facility explained many of the unusual aspects of the siege at FOB Kestrel. The sophisticated communication intercepts, the advanced coordination of enemy forces, and the precise timing of defensive responses all suggested the presence of personnel with advanced training in electronic warfare and signals intelligence. This facility was the nerve center for the entire operation. Sarah selected her remaining GBU-57 bunker buster for the attack. The massive weapon would ensure complete destruction of the facility and any underground components that might not be visible from aerial reconnaissance. But using her last major weapon would also mean that she would have extremely limited ordnance for any additional targets that might be identified. Kestrel, this is Ghost. Engaging intelligence facility with maximum ordnance. This should eliminate their capacity to coordinate further operations in your area. The approach to the target required flying through another series of mountain passes, but without the threat of an integrated air defense network, Sarah could focus entirely on precise navigation and target identification. Silent Thunder's targeting systems locked onto the center of the facility complex, ensuring that the bunker buster would achieve maximum destructive effect. Target locked, weapon away. The GBU-57 fell through the storm clouds like the hammer of justice, its massive warhead carrying enough explosive power to destroy an entire city block. Sarah banked Silent Thunder away from the target area while monitoring her tactical displays for the impact. The explosion was even more dramatic than the destruction of the command post. The massive detonation created a fireball that rose above the mountain peaks, followed by a series of secondary explosions that suggested the facility had contained significant ammunition or fuel storage. The blast wave triggered avalanches throughout the valley system, and the thermal signature indicated that fires were burning throughout the destroyed complex. Kestrel, this is Kestrel. We're seeing massive explosions to our northwest. Can you confirm the target was destroyed? Target eliminated, Kestrel. The intelligence facility has been completely destroyed, along with their capability to coordinate further operations against your position.
As the smoke and debris from the destroyed intelligence facility settled into the mountain valleys below, Sarah began receiving reports from FOB Kestrel that confirmed what her tactical instincts had already told her. The enemy assault was collapsing. Without their command structure, air defense network, and intelligence coordination capabilities, the attacking forces were rapidly losing cohesion and effectiveness. But Sarah knew that a wounded enemy could still be dangerous, and she needed to ensure that the threat to FOB Kestrel was completely eliminated before declaring the mission successful. Kestrel, this is Ghost. I'm detecting significant movement in enemy positions around your perimeter. It appears they're beginning a general withdrawal, but I need to confirm they're not repositioning for another assault. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes' voice carried a note of cautious optimism that hadn't been present since the siege began. Ghost, we're seeing the same thing from our observation posts. Enemy fire has decreased significantly, and several forward positions appear to have been abandoned. But you're right to be cautious. We can't afford to let our guard down until we're certain the threat has been eliminated.
Sarah used Silent Thunder's advanced surveillance capabilities to conduct a comprehensive reconnaissance of the entire battle area. The synthetic aperture radar painted a detailed picture of enemy movements, revealing that the withdrawal was indeed genuine and widespread. The attacking forces were abandoning their prepared positions and moving away from FOB Kestrel in small groups, apparently attempting to avoid further airstrikes by dispersing into the mountainous terrain. But Sarah's years of combat experience had taught her that enemy withdrawals could be as dangerous as enemy attacks if not properly managed. Retreating forces often left behind booby traps, prepared ambush positions, or stay-behind teams tasked with conducting harassment operations. She needed to ensure that the area around FOB Kestrel was completely clear before rescue operations could begin. Kestrel, I'm going to conduct a final sweep of your perimeter to ensure no enemy forces remain in position to threaten relief operations. Are you able to provide any additional intelligence on enemy movements from your observation posts? Roger, Ghost. Our forward observers report enemy forces moving northeast and southwest along established mountain trails. No indication of prepared ambush positions, but we're maintaining defensive postures until the all clear is confirmed. Sarah began a systematic patrol pattern around FOB Kestrel, using her remaining ordnance to destroy abandoned enemy equipment and eliminate any positions that could be used for future attacks. Her 2 remaining small-diameter bombs were used to destroy an abandoned heavy weapons position and a cache of equipment that appeared to have been left behind during the hasty withdrawal. As she completed her reconnaissance sweep, Sarah's communication systems crackled with an incoming transmission from the Pentagon Situation Room. General Harrison's voice carried a note of satisfaction that she hadn't heard since the crisis began. Ghost, this is Overwatch. We're receiving reports of successful mission completion. Can you confirm the status of FOB Kestrel and the elimination of enemy threats? Overwatch, this is Ghost. The 72-hour siege has been broken. Enemy command structure, air defense network, and intelligence facilities have been destroyed. Attacking forces are in general withdrawal, and FOB Kestrel is secure. The base is ready for relief operations. There was a brief pause before General Harrison responded, and when he did, his voice carried the weight of command authority and personal gratitude. Outstanding work, Major Chen. You've just accomplished what conventional forces couldn't achieve in 3 days. Relief helicopters are already en route to FOB Kestrel, and medical evacuation aircraft are standing by for wounded personnel. But even as Sarah felt the satisfaction of mission completion, she understood that the implications of what had transpired went far beyond a single rescue operation. The sophistication of the enemy operation, the presence of advanced intelligence collection capabilities, and the obvious involvement of foreign military advisors suggested that this had been a test of American response capabilities, a test that would be analyzed and studied by potential adversaries around the world. Overwatch. Be advised that the enemy operation showed significant sophistication and possible state sponsorship. Intelligence collection efforts were far more advanced than typical insurgent capabilities. This suggests the incident may have broader strategic implications. Roger, Ghost. Intelligence analysts are already reviewing all available data from the operation. Your actions tonight may have prevented not just the loss of FOB Kestrel, but the compromise of significant intelligence assets that could have affected national security. As Sarah began the long flight back to Whiteman Air Force Base, she reflected on the events of the past 18 hours. The bureaucratic safety review that had initially grounded her seemed almost laughably insignificant compared to the life and death decisions she had been forced to make during the mission. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same officials who had questioned her psychological readiness for combat operations had ultimately depended on her unique capabilities to resolve a crisis that threatened to become a strategic disaster. The flight home would give her time to decompress from the intense stress of combat operations, but Sarah knew that the real impact of the mission would be felt in conference rooms and briefing centers around the world. The successful penetration of a sophisticated enemy defense network by a single stealth bomber would send a clear message about American military capabilities, while the destruction of the intelligence collection facility would disrupt whatever long-term intelligence gathering operations had been planned. More importantly, 150 American soldiers would be going home to their families instead of becoming casualties of a siege that had been designed to test American resolve and capabilities. As Silent Thunder climbed to cruising altitude for the long journey home, Sarah's secure communication system delivered final confirmation that relief operations at FOB Kestrel had been successful. The first helicopters had landed safely, medical personnel were treating wounded defenders, and supply aircraft were already en route to resupply the base.
The Pentagon briefing room was packed with officials from every branch of the military and several civilian intelligence agencies as Sarah concluded her after-action report 3 days later. The detailed analysis of the mission had revealed the true scope of what she had faced over the mountains of Afghanistan, and the implications were staggering enough to require briefings at the highest levels of government. The enemy operation represented the most sophisticated threat we've encountered in this theater, Sarah explained to the assembled officials, using satellite imagery and electronic intelligence data to illustrate her points. The integration of advanced air defense systems, electronic warfare capabilities, and intelligence collection facilities suggests coordination and support from a nation-state actor with significant military capabilities. General Harrison nodded grimly as he reviewed the classified intelligence reports that had been compiled from the mission data. Major Chen's actions didn't just break a siege, they prevented what could have been a strategic intelligence disaster. The enemy intelligence facility was specifically designed to collect data on American response capabilities, communication protocols, and tactical procedures. The implications were clear to everyone in the room. If the enemy had succeeded in capturing FOB Kestrel and its intelligence assets while simultaneously collecting detailed data on American military responses, the information could have been used to plan future operations that would be specifically designed to counter American advantages in technology and tactics. But what impressed the assembled officials most wasn't just the successful completion of the mission. It was the fact that a single pilot flying a single aircraft had accomplished what would normally require a coordinated effort involving dozens of aircraft and hundreds of personnel. The demonstration of the B-2's capabilities had been so decisive that it would likely influence military planning and procurement decisions for years to come. Major Chen, said Admiral Richardson, the Joint Chiefs representative, your performance during this operation exemplifies everything we hope to achieve with advanced military technology. But more importantly, it demonstrates that technology is only as effective as the personnel who operate it. Sarah appreciated the recognition, but her thoughts remained focused on the broader lessons of the mission. Sir, I think the most important takeaway from this operation is that our potential adversaries are developing increasingly sophisticated capabilities to challenge American military advantages. The safety review process that initially grounded me exists for important reasons, but we need to ensure that bureaucratic procedures don't prevent us from responding effectively to genuine threats. The comments sparked a discussion that continued for over an hour, with officials debating how to balance safety requirements with operational necessity. Sarah's experience had highlighted a fundamental tension in modern military operations: the need to minimize risk in peacetime training while maintaining the capability to accept calculated risks in combat operations. Colonel Martinez, who had initially opposed Sarah's return to flight status, was among the first to acknowledge the lessons learned from the incident. Major Chen's actions didn't just break a siege, they prevented what could have been a strategic intelligence disaster. The enemy intelligence facility was specifically designed to collect data on American response capabilities, communication protocols, and tactical procedures. But Sarah understood that the real validation of her performance wouldn't come from Pentagon briefings or commendation ceremonies. It would come from the knowledge that 150 American soldiers had returned home safely to their families. That was the measure of success that mattered most to any combat pilot.
3 weeks after the mission, Sarah received word that Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and the personnel from FOB Kestrel had been safely evacuated and that the base had been reinforced with additional security measures. Intelligence analysts had confirmed that the enemy operation had been part of a broader campaign to test American response capabilities in preparation for future conflicts, but the decisive nature of Sarah's intervention had disrupted those plans and forced a reassessment of enemy strategies. The Safety Review Board that had initially grounded Sarah quietly revised their procedures to ensure that combat-experienced personnel could be rapidly returned to flight status in emergency situations. The changes weren't publicly announced, but they represented a significant shift in how the military balanced risk management with operational requirements. Silent Thunder itself had suffered only minor damage during the mission, and maintenance crews had restored the aircraft to full operational status within 48 hours of its return to Whiteman Air Force Base. The B-2's performance during the mission had exceeded all expectations, validating decades of research and development while demonstrating capabilities that had previously existed only in theoretical studies. But for Sarah, the most meaningful recognition came in the form of a personal message from Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, transmitted through secure military channels. Ghost, words can't express the gratitude of everyone at FOB Kestrel. You didn't just save our lives, you reminded us why we serve and what American military excellence really means. As Sarah prepared for her next training mission several weeks later, she reflected on how the events had changed her perspective on military service. The bureaucratic frustrations and safety reviews that had once seemed so important now appeared insignificant compared to the reality of combat operations where split-second decisions could mean the difference between life and death for American soldiers. The stealth bomber program continued its operations with renewed confidence and support from senior leadership, while the lessons learned from Sarah's mission were incorporated into training programs and operational procedures throughout the Air Force. But most importantly, the successful rescue of FOB Kestrel had sent a clear message to potential adversaries around the world. American military capabilities, when properly employed, remain unmatched. Sarah climbed into Silent Thunder's cockpit for another training mission, but she carried with her the knowledge that she had proven herself in the ultimate test of military aviation, successfully completing a mission where failure would have meant the loss of American lives. It was a responsibility she had never taken lightly, and one that would continue to guide her throughout her career. The 72-hour siege was over, but the legacy of how it ended would influence American military operations for years to come.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.